Hi, everyone, and welcome to our chat that is going to be based on police abuse in the region. We hope that you take this away as a legal empowerment tool and you can use it within your communities. My name is Daniel Dechashu. I am with the Southern Africa Litigation Center. And today I have with us our legal head, which is Thabo Buthelezi. I will give him a chance to introduce himself. Thabo, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Danny. My name is Thabo Buthelezi. I'm the social justice researcher at the Southern Africa Litigation Center. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
Okay, yeah. No, thank you, Thabo. As I mentioned, we will be talking about police abuse today, an issue that I believe is contentious in nature because we can't seem to all agree on exactly what practices are allowed. If you ask communities, they've got their view. If you ask the police themselves, they have their view. So, Thabo, could you please give us an overview on what police abuse is? And just lay a legal framework, a legal ground for us so our viewers can understand the issue that we're about to discuss today.
Okay, thank you, Danny. So with regard to what police abuse is, it takes on various forms, but at its substance, it's the overuse or the illegal use of powers by police. And so what this entails is undue arrests, arrests that are basically not aligning to what the law says. And I think we'll get into that a bit more. But it also includes the use of what we call unnecessary violence. And again, we'll sort of get to that as we chat. In terms of the legal framework, in most of our jurisdictions, we have constitutions that guarantee various rights. And so rights like equality, the right to non-discrimination, privacy, and fair trial processes are rights that are guaranteed to everyone, regardless of where you come from, the color of your skin, sex, gender, sexual orientation. And these are specifically important, especially when it deals to police. But be over and above that, we have legislation and procedures that govern our relationship as citizens with the police and the police's relationship with citizens. So, for example, criminal procedure codes, which are guidelines in terms of carrying out criminal law. So these include whether or not a person should have bail, what to look at in terms of bail proceedings. There's also police acts and regulations that govern the conduct of police themselves. Yeah, so there's various legal frameworks that we can look into, especially when it comes to the issue of police abuse.
Okay. Thank you so much for that overview, Thabo. As you were speaking, I was thinking, on top of all those the acts and the procedures, there must be a way. And I know this is maybe going towards the end a little bit, but I'm thinking there must be a way to ensure accountability, to ensure that those who overlook these procedures, overlook these acts and the laws, who act against the law, actually, there must be a way to ensure that they are held accountable. So I wanted to just quickly find out from you, also briefly as well, what are the accountability procedures that sort of exist within our very different jurisdictions and countries in helping with dealing with police abuse issues?
Okay, so there's three main accountability procedures that can be used when there's the presence of police abuse, right? So the first one is disciplinary bodies, which deal with hearings within the police, And where an officer is found to be guilty of abusing either a citizen or abusing the system itself, they can be sanctioned. So some of the sanctions that these disciplinary bodies can meter out are suspensions, dismissals, or even fines. There's also, and the second procedure, accountability procedure, is police oversight mechanisms. Now, these are different from disciplinary bodies, as disciplinary bodies are mainly internal within the police services, but police oversight mechanisms are independent. So while they do work with police, they are independent from the police force. And they have sort of like the same workings of disciplinary bodies. They can monitor, review some of the police actions, and also give recommendations on what to do when there has been an act of police abuse. The third one is civil lawsuits and compensation for damages. So this is when you can sue a specific officer or the police department themselves, right, for either wrongful arrest or, the use of unnecessary violence. And compensation for damages is just that, where you ask the court or, the specific disciplinary bodies to say, my rights have been violated, I need compensation for that. And so these are some of the ways that we can hold police accountable.
Okay. Oh, no, that's good to hear that one can seek compensation. But I assume that's not a very easy process to sort of go through. I know a lot of vulnerable groups, and I know this content is mainly made for a lot of the vulnerable communities. So you say one can, seek compensation, one can go through different mechanisms to lay complaints and all that. But how, like realistically, how easy is it to navigate all these systems? And do our communities know that these systems and procedures exist in your sort of experience with having worked with vulnerable groups?
So I think you sort of gave an overview of that. Do communities know? Which is the hardest part about whether you're asking for compensation or just asking for general accountability from the police. The issue is not a lot of people know about these mechanisms. Not a lot of people know that you can actually ask for compensation where your rights have been violated unjustly. And I should sort of clarify that unjustly violated. And we'll get into that when we sort of continue with the conversation. But when asking for compensation, it's generally not easy because there's a lot of things that you need to have. For example, you have to have evidence of that specific violation that you are alleging occurred, right? And a lot of times communities don't document these things. So and this goes back to internalizing the police abuse or sort of normalizing it. So when you are arrested, just crossing the street or just sitting with your friends or whatever the case is, we sort of then see it as a norm, right?
Yeah.
And therefore we don't see accountability because we don't see anything to account for, right? And I think that's the starting point. Understanding what our rights are. Secondly, understanding that we can hold police accountable. Some of the measures, as I've noted, are there. And the one thing with compensation, and I don't want to generally dwell on that because courts and disciplinary bodies have sort of found different ways at coming to the question of compensation, but generally the biggest thing is the documentation of that. It does not necessarily mean that there has to be pictures or videos or all of that. Even a wrongful arrest itself. Can you prove that or did the police prove that the arrest was warranted? If not, then it becomes a wrongful arrest, right? So yeah, I'm sort of like jumping the gun here, because I'm going to like different aspects of criminal procedure and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess the takeaway here is accountability, understanding that we can hold the police accountable, and understanding our own individual rights.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for that. You touched a lot on the wrongful arrest, and when people are arrested, we take it as a norm, or maybe it's that mentality that we have given up on the systems due to their ineffectiveness in our personal experiences. But it's also always good to know that there are channels that we can approach to try and address this issue of police abuse. And speaking on the issue of wrongful arrests or people being arrested by the police, I wanted to ask you, under what circumstances may the police arrest someone without a warrant? And I'm glad that I brought that warrant. I feel like I jumped a gun as well. I also want to know what is needed to make an arrest, for a lack of better words, a legitimate arrest. Like what are the processes? What sort of paperwork is needed for a police officer to make an arrest that is not wrongful? And then, of course, you have to track back to my question of that arrest without having the warrant from the officers. What sort of makes that acceptable, under which circumstances?
So that's a very good question. So just to sort of break it down, right? Any arrest that does not conform to the law is an unlawful arrest. Now, you mentioned the issue of an arrest warrant. And many times the police should issue you with an arrest warrant. Except for instances where arrest without a warrant is permissible. And so, for example, these are instances where a breach of peace is committed in the presence of the officer, where someone obstructs the officer while they're in the execution of their duties, where, for example, the officer has reasonable grounds of believing that you have or about to commit an offense. So this is not an exhaustive list. It also differs from one jurisdiction to another. Some jurisdictions also have grounds such as if a person is found to be lying or loitering in a highway, yard, or garden, right? Which again sort of brings in the vagrancy laws element. But any arrest, whether it is conducted with or without a warrant, should not have unnecessary force. And I keep coming back to this issue because, again, force has been an issue when it comes to arrests. There should also be, the arrest should necessarily be used, or detainment should only be used as reasonably necessary to investigate and charge, right? An arrest should not be used. So, for example, you can't be arrested and then after that are investigating. The investigation should have led to that arrest, unless you were committing the offense in the presence of the officer or, you know, the police.
Yeah.
And also, an arrest should not be taken to be unlawful if it is found by the court that the person did not commit the offense.
Okay.
So again, I'm sort of trying to find like a good way of, you know, packaging this.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
So yeah, there's also other aspects of an arrest that even if the arrest was initially lawful, some of the aspect of that arrest can be found to be unlawful, right? So, for example, entry by a police officer, where there isn't any reasonable, what's the term in English again? I'm forgetting it. There isn't any reasonable belief that the person who is either wanted is in that place. Yeah, so there's also elements like that.
Okay. Okay, cool. I'm just thinking, as we were talking a lot about the communities that we sort of represent and the communities that will find use from this content that we are curating at the moment. And I can't help but feel just terrible for, I mean, we've got communities that engage in sex work, for instance, right? And you brought in vagrancy laws. Depending on what country you live in, we still have communities that that are engaging in informal trade, for instance, that would be arrested for just that, for trading on the streets. We have people who experience homelessness. How can we get ahead of, you know, police abuse? Like, what aspect do we need to look into? And also, people people who engage in sex work, for instance, what would be the reason for or what would be the grounds that they could argue their cases? Especially sometimes you find people are picked up wrongfully and accused that they do engage in sex work. In the meantime, that is not the truth. How do we navigate those kind of complex aspects of yes, the law is there. I'm thinking also about people sleeping on a bench in a park. How do we defend those people, regardless of what laws still do exist in their countries? And how do we now, you spoke about evidence as well. A lot of people who had been arrested and who would complain about police abuse, often it's their word against the officer's word. How do we navigate all those complexities, especially among our communities?
That's a very difficult question to get into.
Yeah,
Again, because there's this notion that the law should protect vulnerable individuals, which is true. But we find that in some instances, the law does the opposite. Like you
yeah,
said, sex workers, people living or connected to the streets, LGBTI persons, persons with disabilities, people who basically, you know, some of the people who rely on the street for survival.
yeah,
And many of these laws, loitering laws, some of them in municipal bylaws, criminalize persons for either begging, sleeping on the street, all of that.
yeah,
The issue then is it's there in the law. So any arrest that confirms to that or any person who is found to be breaching that specific law can be arrested, right?
Yeah.
But then the question is, should they be?
Mm.
And I guess that's the bone of contention that we have, especially when it comes to the work that we do. And
Yeah.
one of the ways that and I guess this sort of comes to answering your question, one of the ways that we've tried to, mitigate or at least protect individuals is through trying to advocate for legal reform. So if these laws are in the statute books, why do they need to be there? If they are repealed, what is the effect of that? If it's positive, then go for it. If it's negative, then how can we then sort of find a balancing way of protecting whatever the state is trying to protect through these laws, and protecting, which is more important, the rights of individuals. But again, when this happens, and it happens a lot in our countries, right? When you are arrested, the one thing that should be clear is the reason for your arrest. So the police must inform you at the time of the arrest of the offense that you are being arrested for. Unless you already know the reason, or it is impossible to inform you at the time. And this would, again, depend on various factors. The police should also inform you of your rights, your right to remain silent, your right to legal counsel, right? And so these are some of the ways that we can try and mitigate the effects of these arrests. Again, these are unjust laws, but they're still laws at the end of the day. And while we advocate for repealing unjust laws, we also have to be cognizant of the rule of law. And I think it's sort of like striking a delicate balance between the two.
Yeah, I agree with you. You speak a lot about the sort of duties of the police officers during the arrest or during detention as well. I just wanted to find out from you, what rights do we have as communities that might find ourselves, being detained, being arrested by police officers? I know you are required to give your information and all that, and the police are allowed to search you. The police may do this, and the police are supposed to give you your rights. But I mean, I'm going to evidence collection, so to say, to what can we do if we find ourselves in that situation that we are arrested and we are being detained? What are our rights? What can we, because the police want your name, can we get the police's name, their rank, like information where they work? Are we allowed that at least? Are we allowed to choose who handles us? Say we go through searches, and a biggest issue also is the gender differences. Are we allowed to say, or does the law stipulate who should search whom?
So, I think the biggest thing is if you are arrested, to comply. So, for example, if a police officer asks you for your name and address, and they explain why they need that information, you must not refuse or fail to comply with that request. Do not give any false information. And you also have the right to ask the police officer for their name, their rank, and place of duty. If you ask them for that specific information, they also should not refuse, fail to comply with that request. They must
Yeah.
not give you any false information and not give you an address other than the correct one. Again, so it's sort of like a reciprocation between you and the officer. And that's why it's important to obey what the law says and obey what the officer is saying. If it is within reasonable, if it is a reasonable request.
Yeah.
If you do refuse to give your name or address to an officer, the officer can arrest you in order to find out who you are.
Okay.
And if they find your real name and address, provided that you probably gave false information, either because you were scared or you were not necessarily sure if the officer was a real officer. And that's why it's also important to ask them for their name, rank, and place of duty. If the officer finds your real name and address, they can let you go if you promise to appear in court if needed. And this links to the issue of bail. Before we talk about bail, I think the important issue is that of detention, right?
Yeah.
If you are taken into custody without a warrant, the officer in charge can inquire into the case and they can release you through their own recognizance. But this is only if the offense is not serious. If you are kept in custody, you must be brought before a court as soon as possible. If they do not do this, then that is a breach of your right to fair trial process. If an officer thinks there isn't enough evidence to charge you, they can release. And this again goes back to the issue of an arrest being not necessarily being effected to investigate. The investigation should lead to the arrest. Many times when a person is arrested, there's use of restraints, right? And when restraint is used, it shouldn't be excessive restraint. When you are arrested, they should help you contact either a lawyer, a friend, or a relative. You must definitely be treated with respect, regardless of sexual orientation, gender, identity, sexual orientation. And if you do need medical assistance and you ask for that, they have a duty to correspond, is that the right term, with that request?
Yeah, I think they yeah, it's fine, go ahead.
Yeah, and they should take the reasonable steps to make sure that medical assistance is provided for. Now, in terms of searching, right? Police can search a person who is in their custody. But this has to be done in a way where it respects the dignity of the person and it respects the rights of the person. For example, a female officer must search a female detainee, for a lack of a better term. And this is because that gives the person who's being detained the right to dignity. And any of those, searches must be done with respect.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot that you just said now.
Yeah. No.
So thanks for sharing all of that. Just going to raise the fact that when a lot of people from vulnerable groups, when they are faced with police officers, be that um, they might be arrested or they are detained. A lot of times they are overcome with fear. And I was wondering, you said that one is allowed to contact family, a friend, or a lawyer. And I was wondering at what point would or should someone, if they are faced with arrest, at what point should they request this? Because I know there's a lot of processes and there's a lot of things that they must be let known of. At what point can you just immediately request, say you find yourself being arrested, can you immediately, as you arrive at a place of detention, can you immediately, before sharing anything, before um, sharing your names, your home addresses, and all those sort of details, can you immediately ask to call either a relative or a friend and maybe a lawyer, depending on how accessible a lawyer is? But I know a lot of times someone who would be accessible on an immediate basis would be either family or a friend. And I ask this question because I feel it's very important to know. And it would help in terms of having a witness there, for instance, like someone to remind you also, because I'm sure you would be terrified and under shock. Someone to remind you to request for the officer's name, for instance, for their rank, for their place of work, and to request all the necessary information that would help you if you are to go to court on the matter. So, at what point can a person rather ask to call a friend or a relative?
Mm. Immediately when arrest is effected.
Yeah,
So if you are taken to police station, you are put in a cell, all of that, you can immediately request for either a lawyer, a friend, or a family member.
yeah,
You know when in those movies when someone is arrested and the lawyer barges in and says,
yeah,
"Why are
yeah.
you questioning my client without my presence?"
Yes.
Very important, right?
Mm, mm.
Because when the questioning happens, the specific stuff that needs to happen. So, for example, you know the right to remain silent.
Yeah,
You should use it. Contact family, friends, legal representative, if possible, as
yeah,
soon as possibly as you soon as possibly can. Sorry,
yeah,
my English is yeah.
it, yeah,
And this helps because, firstly, people then know where you are, which
mm,
police station you're being held at.
yeah,
Um, it also helps in terms of protecting you from arbitrarily being moved from one place to another. People
mm,
can check on you, whether you still have all the things that you need, for example, medication, all of that, right? Um, but it's also important because it protects your rights. Remember, officers do have the right to question you.
yeah,
Um, so, for example, when you are arrested, a police officer may ask you questions, take other investigative actions in connection with the investigation of that offense. Um, and when you are detained, um, you can make a statement, right?
yeah.
But it is always advisable to make the statement in the presence of a lawyer.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Tabo, for that. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the statements being made and the importance of a lawyer being present. But say someone under pressure or under fear does make a statement, um, what like I just want to know what should be in the statement. Say you are scared and you feel pressured and you feel, under duress, so to say. What should one? I'm thinking like as little as possible, but what does one then write in the statement without getting themselves into trouble?
Mm. So when you are asked to give a statement, first and foremost, the officer should give you the writing materials, so pen, paper,
Mm.
and they can ask you to say what you were told if you have been given a caution, right?
Yeah.
So if you are giving a written statement, the officers should write a certificate at the end of it. And they should show the statement to you.
Thanks, Tabo. This has been so cool and so informative. I'd like to know, should someone find themselves being arrested and then ultimately being detained, can you walk us through how bail works? I know like different countries would have different processes, but just in a nutshell, how would the process of bail work?
That's a very good question. And it's a very important one. And I guess before we even talk about the issue of bail, the important thing, which I sort of neglected to mention, is that if you are arrested and no formal charge has been laid against you, you should be released immediately if 24 hours has elapsed, unless the officer deems the offense to be serious. And coming back to bail, they should, when you are arrested, they should tell you of your right to ask for bail. Now, like you noted, right, different jurisdictions have different procedures when it comes to bail. But some of the criterias for bail is whether or not the person is likely to appear in court, your ties to the community, residence, employment, family situation, stuff like that, right? Whether there's a need to protect the community from you or to protect you from the community. So many times when before bail is granted, so the criteria for bail is before bail is granted. So these are some of the things that depending on whether this is police bail or court bail, these are some of the issues that either the court or the police would look at. So when bail is granted, some of the conditions are whether you agree to appear in court at a certain time and place. You promise to quote unquote behave while released on bail. So in addition to the criteria for bail, there's also conditions for bail where some of these conditions need to be met before bail can be granted. For example, if you agree to appear in court at a set time and place, where you agree to pay the bail amount, and depending on the type of bail, there might be a set amount, there might not even be an amount to pay for bail. And sometimes when bail is granted, for example, through the court processes, the court can ask you to give your passport or other travel documents to the police to make sure that you're not a flight risk. To stay within the area that you live, again, to make sure that you do come to court at that set time and, place. But they can also ask for additional conditions. For example, reporting to a police station or other authorities at various times. They can forbid you to visit a specific place or associate with specific people.
Okay.
and any other conditions that the court would then deem necessary. Again, some of these conditions are to make sure that the uh, justice process or the process of justice is not
Mm.
hindered,
Yeah.
and also that you do come to court, which is very important because
Yeah.
a lot of times, and certain communities that we've worked with, a lot of people would then be arrested, need to come to court, and then they decide, you know what, I'm not going there. It's
Mm.
important to go to court because I'm trying to find like the right words, man.
To find the words. Why is it important to go to court? Because because sometimes it's just like, I'm out of here. I don't want to do this. You,
Yeah.
you have to be very convincing in telling these communities why they should go to court.
Hmm. Because I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
I know here if you like skip bail, your name is recorded.
Yeah.
And the next time the officers find you or whatever, you could be charged with contempt of court, or
Yeah.
you might not even get bail for any other
Of-
charges in the
well,
future, even if you were found not guilty of that specific charge.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, Stavo, I do agree with you. Working in different countries and jurisdictions with all the different processes and procedures can be a little bit tricky because what works in the one part of the region doesn't necessarily translate or transfer into other parts of the region. So I just wanted to, before we conclude, actually, because I think we are going to conclude now, I wanted to find out from you, from the partners we've worked with, from your work, are there any strategies that have been, number one, recommended, number two, ones that have worked in addressing the issue of police abuse? And are these strategies easy to duplicate in other jurisdictions, you think?
I think in terms of duplication, it's always hard because most of these strategies um, depend on personal relationships.
Yeah.
The issue of police abuse isn't just, oh, Danny doesn't like those specific person, and because he's an officer, he feels like you should do this, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have instances like that,
Yeah.
but in the most part, police abuse is systemic. For
Yeah.
example, a lot of times when arbitrary arrests are conducted, or where there's like long enforced detention, it's always at the gain of something. So for example, from the work that we've done, we've sort of seen that sometimes officers would arrest either informal traders or sex workers as a way to extort money from them. Now,
Yeah.
this stops being just an individual issue where it now seeps into the whole police system, right? So
Yeah.
then our strategies sort of focus on how do we build rapport with a specific police station. From
Yeah.
that police station, can we get to the officer in charge? From there, can we scale it up, get to that specific ministry? Or, how do we? So it's sort of like a bottom up approach, which
Yeah.
is, I think, the reason why sometimes it becomes very difficult to duplicate it.
Mm.
So, but most of our strategies revolve around the human impact, right?
Yeah.
Understanding that arrest isn't just an arrest for some people. It
Mm.
brings trauma.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these are sort of like the stories that we give to communities, to police officers. Say, sleeping in a police cell is not an easy thing to do,
Mm.
especially with some of the police cells that we have, right? There's trauma to that. But it also puts people's lives on hold.
Yeah.
When I am in a police cell for 24 hours for a week. I can't go out in the street, sell plastic bags, sell veggies to make sure that my family has something to eat. That puts a strain on my family. Even when I come back, I still have to make sure that I make up for the money that I lost last week, while also trying to make sure that I get the money that I'm supposed to get this week. And stories like that, that we try and use to sort of show why police abuse is not only an infringement on rights, but more importantly, on human dignity, encompassing everything of that. Yes, we can climb the mountaintop and say right to dignity, right to fair trial process. But what's sort of important is highlighting the human impact behind some of these police abuses. And again, I think this is something that's easily scalable, that can easily be duplicated. Because whether you're in Zambia, Malawi, South Africa, Botswana, we all have the same thing in common, right? Trying to survive, having our dignity respected. And most importantly, we all have stories to tell. And I think this is something that's sort of a strategy that can be used across all jurisdictions, across various organizations, whether grassroots, regional, or national. And that's sort of, the answer to your question.
Thank you so much. That was well thought through. I agree with you on the strategy that is sort of like the bottom up. I remember we did have the one, I wish I could share slides here, but they are accessible through email or website. But I remember the exercise, the mapping exercise from Malawi, where you would map accessible or sort of hostile environments for many different communities and vulnerable groups. And I thought that was a very useful tool that you could replicate anywhere in the region or anywhere in the world, actually, where you sit as a community or different communities that are experiencing similar things, such as this one, the issue of police abuse. And you can map different institutions, different police stations, different ministries where it's safe to approach as a person who identifies with the community that you come from. And I thought that, for instance, has been a strategy that has worked, especially for us organizationally, and has been well received when we shared with partners, as something that is almost like a global tool that can be replicated anywhere. But this has been super exciting. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We can be accessed through our website, which is www.southernafricalitigationcenter.org. There you will find also social media handles. You'll find many tools, including trainings such as this one on police abuse, but you'll find on many other different thematic areas. If you would like more information on the issue of police abuse, particularly, you can email us on inquiries@salk.org.za. Our email is also accessible through our website, which I mentioned, and I will be putting on the captions as well, so it's easy to access. Thabo, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all your wisdom. Any closing remarks?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I guess and it's always hard to give closing remarks because you're thinking of something quotable. But I think the one thing I'd say in closing is the work we have ahead of us. There's a lot to do. But it only, there's a saying that you can finish an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what we need to remember. Pace ourselves. We'll get there eventually.
I share your sentiments. We will eat this elephant one little bite at a time. And today's bite was police abuse. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next time. Cheers, Thabo.
Thank you. Bye.